Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Rotors Magazine. My name is Kenny McKee, and today behind me I have my 1988 Mazda RX7 10th anniversary. This is one of 1,500 made, and I saw in the comments you guys were asking about what to look for when buying an FC, so I thought I'd pull mine out and show you guys what's up. So I'm going to be going over the basic things you'd be looking for as far as what could be catastrophically wrong. Not really the super minute details, but I just want to give you an idea of what to look for. That way you don't get yourself caught into buying an FC. So the first and foremost thing is that the FC is a car from the 80s, and if you know anything about the 80s, you'd be more than aware that pretty much everything from the 80s is a pile of shit. So the FC is not a piece of shit, it's not a terrible car. That being said, there's a lot of things involved in the car that are actually pretty terrible that need to be replaced if you want to have a reliable car in year 2017. These cars, you have to keep in mind, are borderline 40 years old. They're getting there really quick, and I don't know how to do math. And you need to keep in mind that these cars are getting up there in age. They're over 30 years old now. So this is an S4 T2, but the things I'm saying are going to apply to both an S4 and an S5, as well as an NA and turbocharged one. So let's go ahead and jump into it real quick and see what's going on. All right, so when you open up the hood of an S4 or an S5 T2 or any sort of FC, you're going to be looking immediately for leaks anywhere. Common places to leak that you really shouldn't be super concerned about is the oil pan. The oil pan actually is very difficult to seal in an RX-7. But other than that, your oil cooler lines, which can be on the other side of the block, they're going to be down here. You're not going to miss them. Oil cooler lines, there's going to be one to the front cover, and there's going to be one that goes to the back end of the block. The copper washers can go bad over time, so oil can leak out of those. As well as the oil filter pedestal, which is on the other side of the intake manifold. It's on the deep side. You can't miss it as well. Check for an oil leak there. That's an O-ring. But other than that, I mean, the leaks aren't really major. Look for a leak on, of course, your oil feed and oil return line. That's the lifeblood of your turbo. Make sure that stuff's going well. As well as your water pump. Underneath the water pump, if it's leaking underneath this main pulley here, which could be your clutch fan as well. If there's a water leak down there, that's your weep hole for your water pump. If that's leaking, you have a bad water pump, and that needs to be addressed immediately. That also brings me to another point. If you are buying an FC and the owner is ever told, if the owner says the car is ever overheated, I would just steer clear of that to begin with. Because an overheated rotary engine, rotaries don't take well to overheating at all. So if the engine overheats, that could be bad news bears for you. It could mean you have a warped iron, it could mean you have warped housings, it could mean you have bad coolant jackets. There's a whole bunch of bad news that can be there. So be wary of a car that's overheated at one point in time. Another major leak you're going to be looking for, and this one can be catastrophic for a lot of people, is the fuel pressure dampener, which is going to be on the back side of your engine towards the primary rail. So it's going to be deep down there. The primary rail is the one with the injectors that are closer, not farther away. Your secondary is your top rail that has the injectors far apart. Your primary rail is going to be your rail that has the injectors close together. You're going to look down there. You're going to be looking at the left side towards the back of the rail. There's where the line comes out. There's what's called a fuel pressure dampener. The fuel pressure dampener, when it goes bad, will shoot fuel actually out of the fuel pressure dampener on top of the engine or on top of your exhaust and catch fire. This is when you hear about rotary engines catching fire, that's what it comes from, is the fuel pressure dampener. If you want to fix the fuel pressure dampener problem, or you want to make sure it won't ever do that, you can replace that with a banjo bolt if you have an S4, or if you have an S5, you need to replace the entire rail with an S4 rail because the fuel pressure dampener is actually built into the rail. So replace that fuel pressure dampener, you won't have any sort of fuel problems as long as on your line spring a leak. But other than that, I mean, as far as leaks go, those are your only major leaks you're going to be looking for specifically is going to be your fuel pressure dampener, any sort of water leaks, any oil leaks, oil cooler, oil pedestal. But your oil pan is probably going to leak realistically, and that's what to look for. So let's go ahead and jump into the car and take a look at the interior. So as you get an FC, there's a few things you need to know. I'm really tall, I'm sorry. There's a few common things that goes on with the FC on the inside. These are things that aren't major issues. These are all cosmetic things to look for. But they're all common things. So if you look up here in this top corner, there's these triangle-shaped vents that are on both the passenger and the driver's side. These typically don't exist in very many FCs. So if you don't see them, if they're broken or whatever, don't be alarmed. That's a super common problem. My dude Landon Bulk over at LRB Speed, he's also on eBay, has replacement aluminum ones for these that don't break ever. So if you could check that out, if you're obsessive compulsive about that stuff, I'm gonna replace it. Mine doesn't have it on the passenger side. I'm not really super OCD about it, but make sure that you can replace those LRB Speed. Another common problem is the center clock surround that's going to be right up here in the middle of the dash. These like to break because people take these out incorrectly all the time. If that's broken, that's not a big deal. It's a really common issue. You can, like I said, LRB Speed also makes one of these as well for both the S4 and the S5 center surround. So if you need one of those, check that dude out for sure. Another thing you're going to find with an FC is that sometimes the shifters are really sloppy. We call them sloppy dick shifters over rotors, but basically, if the shifter's really sloppy, that's not an issue. It is an issue, but it's not a major issue. It's a very, very, very common issue with FCs that aren't really that's owned by someone that's meticulous about their car. So if you put it in gear and the shifter weighs back and forth like 3 inches, that's a super common problem. It's a simple shifter bushing. It's not super hard to replace. There's tons of forums that have tutorials on how to fix that. So that's that. As well as the last issue that's on the interior that you'll typically find in FC is that the door switch down here on the driver's side or passenger side will go bad over time. And that's not because the switch is bad typically. It's because the connections are old and they corrode over time. All you gotta do is clean up those connections, and you should have your door switch work, or you should have your window switch working correctly. For instance, in this car, my passenger side doesn't work on the driver's side very easily. It will work sometimes, but not all the times. And that's a super common problem, not something to be super alarmed about. Now, when you jump into an 88 or anything that's before like a 91, I believe, I don't know the exact year the airbags started. None of these cars have airbags in them. So there's nothing to really worry about as far as the safety stuff goes, unless you like airbags. But as well as that, not all the electronics, I mean, it is a car for the 80s. You probably will have like electrical issues of some sort in the interior wise, but none of them really cause for alarm. There's nothing really major. But as long as the car starts and runs, that's all that really matters. So yeah, so we'll jump back outside, take a look at some exterior stuff, then we'll jump into what to look for when you're test driving the car. So now we're at the exterior of the car, and these are just gonna be some minor things you need to be looking for. Rust isn't really an issue with these cars that bad. There's gonna be main spots, gonna be like the sunroof up there, and then the back glass has a little surround. That likes to rust a little bit, but really there's not really major rust issues. As long as the car is like driven in like a non-rust belt area, of course. One common issue with the FCs is this side trim stuff. For one, I'm lucky to even have this on the car because typically the side trim doesn't like to come with the cars. The one will grab them. With the S4, they're double-sided taped onto the car. So it has double-sided tape from the 80s still on the car, and the one grabs it and rips it off. So I got lucky that I still have this. It's a simple repair to fix this. All you do is you take it off, scrape the old stuff off, put new stuff down, slap it back on, it's good to go. But then S5, that's not gonna be an issue because the S5 actually clamps into the car. They have clips that clip into the car. That's not a big deal. So as you move back here, this car has what Sean Landers, Promoter Resurrection, likes to call the backwards wheel mod. So Turbo 2 wheels are actually directional. They spin a certain way. This one's actually mounted backwards. So if you see the wheels are backwards, I mean, that's not a major issue, it's just a funny thing. But these wheels actually need to be rotating this way, not that way. So the backwards wheel mod is a thing for Turbo 2 owners. It's a Turbo 2 wheel thing. So one common thing you're gonna see with Turbo 2 FCs or any sort of FC is that there's not much rust in these cars really for the most part. As long as the cars aren't driven like a rust belt state where there's a lot of salt in the roads, you're not gonna see much rust. I live in Nebraska, so there is a bit of salt, but basically the main place you're gonna see rust, if there is rust in the car, is gonna be right up here along the sunroof. The sunroof likes to build corrosion occasionally. That's an easy fix, basic bodywork stuff. And then as well as that, if you come back to the back glass, at the back glass there's also, likes to get a little corrosion in the back glass. This car actually has rust in both of those spots. But nothing really outside of that are really major rust spots in an FC. Now, one thing to keep note is that the paint in FCs it's not the best. It's from the 80s, like I said, so everything from the 80s isn't that great. But the paint is bad, especially in the UC, the crystal white FCs. 10th anniversaries were all crystal white. And if you look at a 10th anniversary and it doesn't have paint chips, it was more than likely repainted. The reason that happened was because the base coat and the primers from those paints that era actually didn't mix well in the white specifically. So if you look at this car, there's tons of chips everywhere all over the paint. For example, I took it to a pressure washer 2 weeks ago and literally blew paint off the side of the car. So with the white paint, that's a major issue. The other paint's not so much. The other paints, might have clear coat issues. They might have fading issues. But that's not really anything to be worried about. It's a more telling tale of how the car has been treated over time. I would honestly rather have a car that has those paint imperfections than one that has been repainted, so that way I know for a fact what's been done to the body beforehand. So original paint's a major thing for me. It doesn't necessarily have to be a thing, as long as you have Carfax and things like that of the car. But if you see chips in the paint, that's something to be alarmed. This means the car is original. So it's a very, very common issue. But yeah. All right, so now that I've shown you the interior, the exterior, and the engine bay of an FC, I need to talk to you guys about the test drive, because the test drive is the most important part about buying an FC or an RX-7 in general. Now, if you start the car up, it should smoke minimally, if at all. So if you start it up and it smokes white billowing smoke, you probably have a coolant jacket issue. The coolant jacket is what seals the water passages from getting into the combustion chamber. If you're getting white smoke, the car needs a rebuild. If you go to start the car and it's blowing out blue smoke, it could be your oil control rings, or you could have a stuck oil metering pump. Both those things are major issues, but probably assume the oil control rings. Oil control rings are also in need of a rebuild. The car should smoke minimally, if at all. If it smokes minimally, it could be too stroke oil. It could be just a little bit of oil, but getting by. That's not a huge deal. But you need to take those things into consideration. You need to understand what your budget is and how mechanically inclined you are. If you're not afraid of taking the car apart, it might be worth it to buy a car that might have a little minimal issue. So you check for smoke. If there's no smoke anywhere, you go start the car. You're gonna drive the car around, get it up to operating temp. Once the car's operating temp, start taking it through the full red line. Any rotary owner is gonna understand why you want to take the car to the red line. So you're gonna take the car to the red line a few times. The car should rev smoothly. It shouldn't cut. If it cuts, it means you could have an ignition issue, it could mean you have a fuel issue, it could mean you have an ECU issue, it could mean you have a tune issue. All those things can be issues that you can negotiate the price down with. The car should rev smoothly from 1,000 RPM all the way to 9,000 RPM if it revs that high. So the car should rev smoothly. If it doesn't rev smoothly, that's a cause for concern. Now, if the car revs smoothly and everything goes well, once you bring the car back, you want to shut it down for a minute or two and then turn it back on. If the car turns back on immediately without a problem, the car is good to go. If it doesn't turn on easily, you could have a compression issue or another major issue. That's also another talking point. Now, when you go in behind the car, obviously it's user discretion, but if you're mechanically inclined, you feel like you can fix it, go for it. But if the compression's bad, you're gonna end up spending a lot of money really quickly. It could be bad apex seal. Bad apex seal could mean bad irons, bad housings. It could mean you have to replace the entire engine. If you're lucky, it could mean one thing, but usually it means more things. In my experience, you're typically gonna replace the adjacent irons and then the housing. So you need to pay attention to those things. If you're down to spend money, go for it. If you're not and you're new to the game, I wouldn't recommend buying a car with low compression. I wouldn't recommend buying a car that doesn't start hot. I wouldn't recommend a car that smokes when it starts. Those are the three things you need to look for if you're a new person, you're not quite mechanically inclined, you need those things. So before I leave you, there's one thing I'm gonna tell you. And I haven't mentioned this yet, and I should have mentioned it at the beginning. And that is, if you're going to buy an RX-7, you 500% need the compression test the engine. Why do you need the compression test the engine? Because compression is the lifeblood of any engine, and especially the rotary engine. The compression is what's going to tell you whether or not it's going to be a rotary engine that's going to start and drive, or it's going to turn into a $4,000 to $5,000 rotary engine rebuild. Now, how do you compression test the engine? We've already gone over how to test with an RCTV5 on our channel, the rotarycompressiontester.com tool. Microtech also came up with their own rotor compression tester, and then those are both expensive options, they're $300 to $400 options. But if you don't have that kind of money, or you don't want to spend that kind of money just to check out a car, you can get a piston compression tester, remove the Schrader valve, and go through the compression testing method that way. We have a video coming for that soon. However, if you don't have an AutoZone or Rally's or anything nearby, or if you don't have one on hand, the quick and dirty way that's not necessarily the most reliable way or the best way, but it'll at least let you kind of know what's going on, is to simply remove one of the lower spark plugs, the leading plug, remove one of those plugs, unplug your crank angle sensor, unplug your EGI fuse, do whatever you have to do to stop fuel and gas or fuel and spark from happening, and then crank the car over. Listen for the pulses for the engine as it twists over. If you hear if the sound is consistent, the car probably has good compression, or at least consistent compression across the board. You're not going to know the numbers, but you're going to know you don't have a bad seal or anything like that. However, if the car goes that means that you could have bad apex seal, and typically two pulses are going to mean apex. Two bad pulses can mean an apex seal. One bad pulse can mean a side seal. So you need to know these things ahead of time. But if you're going to take anything away from this video, regardless of what I've said about the leaks, regardless of what I've said about the body, regardless of what I've said about the interior, if you're going to take anything away, compression test the engine. That goes for any rotary car whatsoever. RX-8, RX-7, RX-3, RX-2, R100, Cosmo, any of those cars, you're going to need the compression test the car. I cannot stress it enough. I'm going to say it again. If you're going to buy an RX-7, if you're going to buy an RX, if you're going to buy a rotary powered car, you need to compression test the engine. We're going to give you all the tutorial videos what to look for. We already have the compression tester video. We have a compression engine piston compression tester video coming soon, and then we also, I've just told you how to do it by ear. So you should have no excuse to buy an engine that's completely bad right out the bat, that's just fried. So with that, my name's Ken McKee. You've just tuned in the Rotos Magazine. If you like this video, check out any of the other videos right here. And if you have any more questions or any more tips, leave them in the comments down below. I know I've left out some that a lot of people might consider crucial. So feel free to help out your fellow rotary enthusiasts down below. But I want to thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you in the next one.